Picture this. You're sat on your couch on a bank holiday, having just consumed your body weight in cheese and chocolate, when you find yourself in the mood to watch something comforting and familiar. Something with costumes. Titanic is a no-go, it makes you ugly cry. Brideshead Revisited is great, but Jeremy Irons' voice reminds you of Scar, which reminds you of Mufasa dying, which then makes you ugly cry. And Downton Abbey starts with the news of the sinking of the Titanic.
I thought it was supposed to be unsinkable.
Which... this leaves you with the only correct option. The 1995 BBC adaptation of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. The story of the Bennet sisters is one of the most loved in history, and whether on page or screen, I always get swept up in the costumes, the scenery, and the wordplay of Auntie Jane.
Your defect is a propensity to hate everyone.
Well, yours is willfully to misunderstand them.
But there is one aspect of these stories that always leaves me feeling a little bit stupid. The economics. Why can't the Bennet sisters just stay in their house after their father dies? Why are distant cousins always popping up out of nowhere to inherit stuff? Why doesn't anyone in these stories ever just sell their massive house when they're running low on money? And what is a dowry? I mean, I know it's one of those things that we all pretend that we understand, but really, what is it? Jane Austen stories can easily be enjoyed as romances, but the marriage plots also provide a stage to examine the economic structure and inequalities within the upper class of Regency England. The drama is usually driven by the economic circumstances of the characters, a lot of which are now archaic and can be really hard to understand if you didn't grow up in England or didn't study something practical like law or economics and instead chose to pursue the arts and are now making video essays in your room. To their credit, most filmmakers who have adapted Jane Austen's novels for the screen have resisted the urge to add expository dialogue to lay it all out for us modern day dummies. That's what I'm here for. So, if you'd like to feel a little less lost in Austen, here are 3 key economic concepts that'll help you along. Or, as I like to call them, Austenomics. The real villains of Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion are not the bitchy Bingley sisters, the scheming William Elliot, or even original fuckboy George Wickham. The real villains are entails. A system of inheritance commonly used in Regency England, which threatens to financially ruin our girls Lizzie Bennet and Anne Elliot. In Pride and Prejudice, the Bennet family estate, Longbourn, is entailed and can only be passed to a male heir. Problem is, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet only had girls, which means that when Mr. Bennet dies, all of it will go to Mr. Collins, a creepy distant cousin who no one's ever met.
You may imagine, sir, how happy I am on every occasion to offer those little delicate compliments which are always acceptable to ladies.
Now, I know this sounds like some crazy rich people nonsense, but at the time, entailing your property kind of seemed like a good idea. Entails, also known as fee-tails, were a form of trust which restricted the sale or inheritance of property and prevented it from being sold or subdivided. Basically, it was a way to make sure that an estate remained intact by ensuring that only one person could inherit it at a time, and that that person couldn't sell it, gamble it away, or do anything to devalue it. The inheritor technically didn't own the property. They were essentially lifelong tenants. That meant that no matter how broke or desperate you got, if you were a tenant for life in one of these entailed estates, you couldn't sell it to raise funds. This is why, in Persuasion, the Elliot family moved to cheaper accommodation in Bath and leased out their estate, Kellynch, to the Croft family. They couldn't sell the land to get themselves out of financial trouble.
And if I can ensure that we live within our means, somewhere less extravagant, then in only a few years we may be solvent again.
A few years?
Cash may rule everything now, but not so much during the Regency era. Power belonged to those who owned substantial land as well as wealth, so entails were seen as a way to keep a family's social status and power intact. Because Longbourn is entailed, it'll all go to Mr. Collins, and he'll be able to live there and enjoy the £2,000 a year income, while poor Mrs. Bennet and her daughters will be set out to fend for themselves and live on their mother's meagre marriage settlement.
I think it the hardest thing in the world that your estate should be entailed away from your own poor children.
Not all estates were entailed, and it wasn't the default law. Entails had to be set up by families themselves, and they had to be renewed every few generations. If the Bennet home hadn't been entailed, it could have been divided amongst Mr. Bennet's 5 daughters after his death. But this would have devalued the estate over time, as each sister got married and had children who would then go on to inherit progressively smaller shares. They would also have forfeited their piece of land once they got married, thanks to Coverture, a legal doctrine that decreed that upon marriage, a woman's property and wealth passed into the hands of her husband. Systemic misogyny, am I right? So while it is a truth generally acknowledged that a man with a healthy fortune must be in search of a wife, it's probably because he wants to keep that healthy fortune in the family. All the single ladies in Austen's novels were worried about their dowries. On top of losing control of their money, property, and legal status as an individual, women's families had to pay a dowry when they got married. I always thought dowries kind of made it sound like families were paying someone to take their daughters off their hands, which, like, rude. But it turns out that in the Regency era, dowries were sort of seen as a way of safeguarding a woman's financial future. Again, something that seemed like a good idea at the time. A dowry, also known as a fortune or portion, is basically a daughter's portion of the family wealth, which is given to her upon marriage. And when I say her, I mean her husband, because Coverture. The dowry was then usually invested in government bonds, which yielded a return of 4 or 5%, and this became part of the couple's income. If the woman outlived her husband, the interest from the investment became her annual income. And when she died, the original sum would be split amongst her children. A woman with a large dowry could contribute more to a family's income, so the bigger the dowry, the more suitors she had. Austen's characters' dowries ranged in size, from the Bennet sisters' meagre £1,000 each to Emma Woodhouse's impressive £30,000. Elizabeth Bennet's small fortune is a source of contempt in Pride and Prejudice. Her mother's dowry was £5,000, which means that each of her 5 daughters would get £1,000. £1,000 a year invested at 4% is only £40 a year, which even in 1813 is not enough to sustain a genteel lifestyle, nor is it likely to tempt a young gentleman into joining fortunes. Which makes Lizzie's rejection of Mr. Colin's proposal and Mr. Darcy's first proposal revealing. That she would rather face an uncertain future, potentially on an income similar to that of a labourer, instead of marrying someone she doesn't like, says a lot about her values. Compare this to Emma Woodhouse, whose £30,000 fortune allows her to declare that she doesn't intend to marry, spends her time playing matchmaker, and enables her to generally keep everyone at an arm's length, which of course becomes the obstacle she has to overcome in order to grow.
How could you be so insolent to a woman of her character and age and situation?
I dare say she did not understand.
I assure you she did.
So dowries not only played an important role in a young woman's prospects, they also play an important part in character building. You know how everyone in Austen is always sitting around in drawing rooms, writing beautiful letters and going on long, leisurely walks? Yeah, that's because they don't have to work. They're part of a British social class called the landed gentry. And the landed gentry were a little bit snobby about things like capitalism and the pursuit of wealth through something icky like a trade. Ugh. A large part of their income was generated by their land, which they rented out to tenant farmers. They were essentially landlords. Most of them were beneficiaries of generational wealth, with land having been passed down through the family for centuries. One could buy one's way into this social class, which is what George Bingley plans to do in Pride and Prejudice. At the start, he isn't actually part of the landed gentry. We learn that his family's fortune has been acquired by trade, and that his father had planned to buy an estate, but died before he could do so. This is why Charles Bingley was only renting Netherfield, and why his social climbing sisters were pressuring him to buy it. Once Georgie boy buys an estate and becomes a landlord, he and his bitchy sisters can enter the same rarefied space as Mr. Darcy, and it should only take them a couple of generations before they're able to lose the smell of new money. And this is also why, technically, he married up. Because even though Jane Bennet was much poorer than him, her father owned an estate, which means she was part of the landed gentry. Suck on that, Caroline. The landed gentry could also try and supplement their income by investing, which of course can either go very well or very badly. And there was a third source of income, which was typical for rich Brits at the time, but which no one likes to talk about anymore: owning plantations in the Caribbean. Work was permitted for some members of the landed gentry, typically later-born sons who wouldn't inherit much, but there was a very specific list of trades that were deemed acceptable: the law, the military, and the clergy. And it was even more restrictive for women. Please, contain your shock. A high-class woman who didn't marry and wasn't able to live off her inheritance could become a governess, which is basically a live-in nanny/teacher to a wealthy family. But you weren't teaching maths or science, you were teaching manners. So basically your options were raising kids or raising kids. This is the future that Jane Fairfax was facing in Emma, which she really didn't want. Childcare professionals are undervalued today, so you can imagine just how badly compensated they were 200 years ago. It's been 2 centuries since Jane Austen's novels were published, and a lot has changed. So it's a testament to her skill as a storyteller that even as the rules of the social and economic structure in those stories have been forgotten, they're still really enjoyable. But once you start learning about the economic structures of the era, you start to better understand character motivations and the urgency with which some of them act.
Oh, Mr. Bennet, how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I'm thinking of his marrying one of them.
And you see the critiques of inequality subtly woven into the romance.
With father's estate entailed away from the female line, we have little but our charms to recommend us.
There have been many film and TV adaptations, and they're not slowing down. So, whether you're reading in your conservatory, watching from your couch surrounded by crumbs, or sitting in a movie theatre, you can now be satisfied that you are quenching your thirst for socio-economic knowledge, along with your thirst for Mr. Darcy.